Hi, welcome to Book and Bujo, where I talk about all things books, bullet journals, and stationery. Today we're going to see how I did for my April Readathons. So, how did I do in April? Well, you'll have to wait for my April wrap-up to see how I did with my TBR-opoly, but for my Readathons I did not too bad. Let's start with the Autism Acceptance Readathon. My goal for that one was to read at least one book just to broaden my horizons and have a little bit of learning for me and some enjoyable reads, and I ended up reading 3. Now, where we are in May, so it's the first week of May when I'm doing this, I've actually read all 4 books. Of course, only 3 of them count for the Readathon time period. But I did read all 4 books that I wanted to, so that was exciting. The first prompt was to read a non-fiction book about autism, and so I read Sensory, A Life on the Spectrum, and that was put together by Rebecca Ollerton, and it's a variety of autistic authors that write comics and kind of told their story through a comic, and it was just wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very fun to read and just to learn a little bit and maybe even see a little bit of myself in some of that, and so that was kind of exciting, and yeah, definitely enjoyed it. Big thanks to MJ James Wrights, Chelsea Zhao, and The Reading Run for putting this readathon together and hosting it for us. The second prompt was to read an intersectional autism voice. And for that, I was going to read An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. I did not get to that in April, but I did carry it over into my May TBR, and I have read that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thought it was really interesting, it's a sci-fi that's all set in a spaceship that is bound from one place to another, and they've been on this ship for a long time, and it was just really interesting. You've got classism still around during this time period, so you have the lower class on certain floors and the upper class move on up into other floors, and it's just the dynamics between all of that, and the storyline itself and all of the characters was very interesting. Prompt number 3 was read a host recommendation, and actually all of the books I read were all host recommendations. That is The Remaking of Corbin, Wale by Roan Parrish. The Remaking of Corbin, Wale is so interesting. I love the character dynamics, and each of the characters, like Corbin Wale's character is autistic. You know, through school he gets made fun of and people call him weird. They call his aunts witches and things like that just because they're odd. You know, they're not the normal of what those people were used to. And he kind of takes it in stride somewhat, but then he kind of disappears. So then there's all these rumors about him. And then we have another character who went to school with Corbin, but had then since moved, and he is in a long-term relationship with his boyfriend, and he's a pastry chef. Unbeknownst to him, his boyfriend basically had their lives completely mapped out for them, and as soon as he found out, he was like, I don't think this is what I want. So he moves back home with his mom, who his dad used to own this coffee shop, and so his mom was running this coffee shop, and she ended up just turning it over to him. He turned it into a bakery and realized that Corbin Wale would sit in the bakery and just drink coffee and draw, because he's an artist, and a friendship starts from there, and it was just such a heartwarming story. Loved it. Highly recommend. And prompt number 4, the last prompt, is to read an indie Own Voices autism book. And I read The Princess Trap by Talia Hibbert. Now, there was definitely a lot more steam in this readathon book choices than what I typically read. It's a little much, but on their own, they're all really good. It just together, it was a little too much steaminess for me. Okay, so the princess trap, we have a lady that works at this school. She's kind of in the HR department. This gentleman comes in for scholarships to give like underprivileged kids a chance because they're smart too and they just need to be given a chance to show who they are. And he sees her, of course, and is quite smitten, and they find themselves in a compromising situation in an alley. And there's some paparazzi that just like pop up. And come to find out, he may not be just this random gentleman, and there may be more to this story than she realizes, and finds out, you know, he's a prince. And in order to save her from having her picture splashed all over the tabloids everywhere, he says that she is his fiancée. Because the royal family, you cannot publish bad publicity about them. She's not quite sure how to take this and isn't too happy about it. It's just so fun. I love the main characters. She is a hoot. Again, a strong female character, which Talia Hibbert is really good at writing, and the storyline was fun too, and I loved all the character work itself just was great, and the storyline was interesting, and you know, the whole fake dating and all that. It's always so fun, so much fun. Probably one of my favorite tropes is the fake dating. That was the Autism Acceptance Readathon, and I did complete it because you know, you didn't have to read all of the prompts. As long as you read at least one book, you were good. I completed that. So my year-long readathons, we have Buzzwordathon, and for April we had to have nature in the title, and I chose Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus by Dusty Bowling, and I absolutely loved this book. I loved Dusty Bowling's writing in general. They're all middle grade books. They're super easy to read, but they always have some kind of, I guess, moral to the story to them, but they take kind of hard topics and make an interesting story out of them that resolve. They're feel good, but you learn something along the way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We have Avon Green. This is the first book in the Avon Green series, and her family lives in the Midwest, and come to find out her father lost his job and is looking for work, and he gets called to kind of manage this like Old West amusement park that has restaurants, has a little zoo, it has, you know, entertainment and all of that. So it's kind of a fun little place, and it's called Stagecoach Pass, and of course it's in Arizona, in the Phoenix area. Him and his wife decide that the three of them are going to move to Arizona and run this Stagecoach Pass. And it's kind of interesting because Avon Green has no arms. So she was born that way. You know, where she lived, it wasn't that big of a deal because all the people that she went to school with grew up with her and kind of got used to it from being young children in, you know, preschool all the way up to then starting middle school, and they were all comfortable with it. They knew her, and she wasn't embarrassed about, you know, having to eat with her feet or, you know, that kind of thing. She's a little nervous moving to a new town now that she's getting older, and she's going to have to make all new friends and get over her embarrassment about all of the, you know, she has to take notes with her feet. She has to, you know, everything is done basically with her feet. It's kind of a little bit of a mystery as well. Avon goes to school. Of course, everyone's looking at her like, something's different here. There's, it's, you know, it's not like you can just like wear a hat and hide bad hair day. It's pretty obvious if you don't have arms. And the kids are trying not to stare, you know, which is good. Some are completely gawking, some not trying not to stare. She's just trying to make it through the day. She ends up skipping lunch because she doesn't want to feel embarrassed by eating with her feet. Even though her feet are completely clean, she always washes her feet before she eats. And she does love, though, that she gets to wear slip-on shoes and doesn't have to worry about hiking boots and snow boots and that kind of thing, which are really hard to take on and off easily to then, you know, take notes and things like that at school. One day at lunch, she decides to go into the library instead. And she is in the library and just kind of studying, reading a book, and there's a boy there with her, and he just starts barking. And she's like, "Did you bark at me? Like, why are you barking at me?" And come to find out, he has Tourette's. And one of the tactics that he has is to bark. And they strike up a little friendship, which is super fun. I love the dynamic in this. Their friendship is really nice. And another day, she ends up tripping over Boy as she's hurrying down the hall, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and then keeps going. And then a couple days later, she sees him again, and she's like, oh, maybe I should say hi to him. So she introduces herself to him, and he is a little bit on the chubby side, and so he doesn't like to be in the cafeteria to eat lunch either, because he feels very self-conscious that everybody's looking at him while he's eating. And so she invites him into their friend group, and the three of them become really good friends, and then they have to solve this mystery that is at the Stagecoach Pass, and it's super fun. Highly recommend it. Just so heartwarming, and I love all of the representation that Dusty Bowling puts into her books as well. She always has some kind of diversity and some kind of social issue that she includes in her books, and I really wish that she would have had these books out when I was in middle school, because I would have read every single one of them and been obsessed. So definitely check it out. Give it a read. So I did read 3 books for April that fit with the 52 book club prompts for 2024. The 7th prompt in that one is a book that has at least 4 different POVs, and for this one I read Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, and that is the 9th book in the Wheel of Time series, which of course we have 4 main characters, and almost all of them in some way are featured as a POV in all of the books. So this one definitely counted for that. And then prompt number 16 is an omniscient author. So I struggled a little bit with this one when I was originally trying to figure out books to read. I'm like, what exactly is an omniscient author? Like, what does that really mean? Is that supposed to be like a godhead that's looking over that knows all? Or is it someone writing from the future that is kind of reliving the past with you? Because then, of course, they know everything that's happening. So I Googled it, of course. I had to do a search. And it came up that The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana qualifies for this book. And I did read that one this month, and it was amazing. I really liked that one. This one also had a random steamy scene in it. It was very short, and it didn't go into a lot of detail, but personally it took me out of the story a little bit, because the whole story is just so wholesome and family oriented. It's found family, and it just felt like, you know, the whole family could read this book together, except for that one little scene. So I still gave it a 4.5 star, but it did take me out of the story just a little bit. And then I also read prompt number 18, an apostrophe in the name, and that was Shade's First Rule by AFK, and that is probably one of my favorite books for this month, or for April, because it was just so much fun. It was an RPG style book, and I had so much fun with that. And I will tell you a little bit more about it in my April wrap-up for my TBR-opoly. All right, next on to Tomes and Treasures. And I did complete this readathon. I got all of the prompts. First prompt was Your Race, and my character is a moon elf named Glowrain, and she is 379 years old, and she is a healer and a baker. And for the elf prompt, you had to read a book with a beautiful cover, and for that I read Dragonfall, which is the 2nd book in the Kingfall Histories by David Estes. That was such a good book. I'm loving this series. I mean, Fate Marked is one of my favorite fantasy series, and this one is even better. We follow quite a few different POVs in this series, and the 2nd book mainly follows Dane and Peony and all the things that they are getting up to. So we also get a little bit more of Gerard's point of view in this book, where we got snippets of it in the first book, but we get a little bit more from him this time, which is really cool, as well as some from his older sister, and just a tad from Aisling. We don't get to hear from Aisling as much in this book as we did in the first book, but of course there's a very good reason for that, but you'll have to read the first book to find out what it is. Next up, I had my class. So my moon elf is a druid, and we had to read a book that features nature or shifters. Of course, in March I read shifter books, so I decided I probably wasn't going to read any in April. So I went with a book featuring nature, and that was Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus by Dusty Bowling. And the name of the book actually comes from a comment that Avon Green makes. She's talking about all the, the cacti, the saguaro that are around in the area, and says, my life is insignificant in the life of these cactus that live hundreds of years, where I'm only on the earth for this tiny little time, and this cactus will keep on living and growing and living for many generations to come after me. And I feel like that's pretty deep for a middle grade book. But I thoroughly enjoyed that quote, and I thought that was really interesting. Very thought-provoking, that just a reminder that we are here for just a small, insignificant amount of time in the life of the rest of just the world and space. And prompt number 3, background. So I'm an Outlander, and I needed to read a book that fits the vibe of the background. And for this one, I read Of Darkness and Light by Ryan Cahill, and this is the second book in the Bound and the Broken series. And this one, of course, definitely fits the vibe of an Outlander who's kind of out in the forest, out in the outskirts. And there's a lot of that going on, like the small little towns and little villages along the way. And of course, the Bound and the Broken, we continue following Kalen and his sister and his friends and all of the dwarves and elves and dragons and uruks and all the other amazing creatures that Ryan Cahill has created in this series. Next up, upbringing, forest. I grew up in the forest, and so of course I needed to read a book set in the forest. And for that I read Winter's Heart, which is again the 9th book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. This is the middle book of the slog. I think it's books 8, 9, and 10. I think is what they said is the slog. 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere right in there. I actually really enjoyed the book. I mean, it's not as good as some of the other books that are in the series, but I still gave it 4 stars and thoroughly enjoyed it. But I'm also someone who's very character-driven reader. I like knowing their backgrounds and their thought process and things like that. So as people are slowly going about their journey and thinking to themselves and discovering things, that's a lot of the stuff that I like. I don't necessarily need action in every single chapter, but I know that for some it's a very slow-paced book. Next up, deity, god of nature. And for that, nature on the cover. So I had to read a lot of nature books, books that had some kind of nature in or on them. And for this one, I read Vampire Academy, Crestview High School by Emily Clark. And this one did have trees on the cover. And I do have to say, the whole like gun thing she's holding like that I'm not sure where in the book that ever came in. I don't remember them mentioning anything about that in the book. So the cover's a little weird for the actual story. And the story itself, it's only 47 pages. What it felt like was that it was kind of like the outline for a bigger story, like an epic fantasy, like, at least 500-page book. And this was the outline to be like, hey, is this a viable story? Should I continue with this? That's what this book felt like. It was not a full story in any way, shape, or form. So you kind of have a little snippet of the beginning, and then it kind of moves quickly to the next stage, and then I feel like you skip a bunch of stuff, and then all of a sudden they're on this quest, and they're fulfilling stuff for the quest, and like, did we even get to read about all of the quests? Or just bits of it, and then it just ended, and I was like, So if it had been a full, like if this book then got made into a full novel, I would absolutely read it, because the storyline, the concept, everything was really interesting. The characters had it was a good start of getting to know them and figuring out who they might become. But as this short little story novella, it was okay. Again, if it comes out as like a series, even like a 200 to 300 page series where you actually get, so each of the chapters from the little novella I read, if each of those chapters became a book in a series, then that would be amazing and I would totally read it. But on its own, it did not stand up very well. but I did read it. Next up, alignment. Lawful, neutral. So I do obey the law, but I'm pretty neutral. Like, I don't necessarily swing one way or the other. Lawful, neutral. This was the only one where you could double up on a prompt. So the lawful and the neutral both had a specific color that needed to be on the cover, and you can combine them. So this one I had to have blue and white on the cover, and I read Shade's First Rule by AFK. And again, I thoroughly enjoyed the story. I like flew through it. I had so much fun. It just complete page turner, and it was so enjoyable. It was a great time. Definitely got to read it. Next up, equipment. So I have medium equipment. So I'm not a lightweight. I actually get a little bit of armor, but I'm not like a paladin or anything. I'm not going to be like full armor. I've just got some padding and a little bit of safety equipment on. And for this one, I needed to continue a series, and I read When the Spell Blows by Renee George, and this is the third book in the Grimoires of a Middle-Aged Witch series, and I love this series. Again, not some great literary work of art, but it is addictive. It is so much fun. I guess you could call this a popcorn read, where you just want to like sit and eat popcorn and just read this book, because it is just so cute. We follow our main character, Iris, and she recently got divorced. Her husband decided that he wanted to marry his son's coach, and divorced his wife and married his partner instead. And the son is a little embarrassed and confused because his dad divorced his mom to marry his coach. So he's just like, this is just a little weird. It's like, you're marrying my teacher and now I'm seeing both of you all the time. It's just, and of course, Iris is wandering around with one of her sisters. All of her siblings are adopted, and she is out one day with one of her sisters, and who of course is like, you gotta get back out there, go start dating other people. And of course, on the sly, is trying to hook her up with one of her professor friends. And they go to this estate sale, and the professor friend just happens to be there, and they kind of hit it off a little bit, friendly banter, want to get to know each other a little bit more, maybe a cup of coffee. But she finds this box that she just feels compelled to buy. She's got to buy what's in there, and she brings it home, and there's a grimoire in there. And come to find out, she may be a witch. And so this series is all about her finding each of the different powers that she has and having to learn how to use them, while getting hit with rocks by a snarky little gnome that only other witches can see. So when it's her siblings are around or other humans are around, she's just looks like a gnome statue that you'd have in your garden. But of course, when it's just the witchies around, then she comes all out with all of her snark and sass, and just like, oh, you're not listening to me? I'm gonna chuck a rock at you. And her name's Linda, the gnome. Oh my gosh. She is a great character. So much fun. Yeah, so she's, of course, Iris is trying to learn all of her powers, and that's basically what all these books are about. And you got a lot of pop culture references in there, and they're just humorous and super fun and very quick reads. Love them. As an elf, I get to learn 2 spells. I could have gotten a weapon, but the spells, there were so many good spells. I had too much trouble narrowing it down to just 2 that there's no way I was going to do just 1. So I'm sticking with spells for now. Maybe next Readathon we'll be able to pick up a weapon or 2. The first spell is Disguise Self. You can disguise yourself. I thought that would be very helpful. And you had to read a book that has had a cover change, which actually was super easy because I am in the middle of Around the Disc in 800, hosted by Literary Diversions, and we are reading through the Discworld and Terry Pratchett's books. And so I read Monstrous Regiment, which is the 31st book in the Discworld series, and this series, every single book in this series has had at least 2, if not 3 cover changes. And Monstrous Regiment was really cute. It was about putting together like an army regiment type of group, and all of them are either females pretending to be males or some type of monster. So there's a vampire maybe we have some dwarves or trolls in there, and it's just, it's so much fun. There's even an Igor, and I love the Igor characters in the Discworld series. If you have not read any of the books with Igor in them, you gotta read them. So good. The next spell I learned was Burning Hands, which I also thought would be very helpful. And this one I had to read a book with a fire on the cover or featured in the book. Very easy. The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie, which is the second book in the Age of Madness series. And that one definitely has fire on the cover and in a few scenes in the book. I am loving this series. I'm still trying to decide if, I think overall these books are written even better than the First Law trilogy, the first ones that came out. But I don't think you would enjoy them as much if you haven't read the first series. Even though it's not all of the same characters, it gets you into the world and into these characters to then be able to kind of understand their descendants a little bit better and the next generation and their quirks and foibles and idiosyncrasies. But yeah, I am thoroughly enjoying the Age of Madness series, and I can't wait to get to the next one and see what else Mr. Joe Abercrombie has in store for us. Because this book was full to the brim of course, politics, political intrigue, betrayal, taken advantage, and finding that moment and seizing it. But also, there's always just a little bit of hope in there and some kindness somewhere in these books, and I appreciate that. Lastly, skills. This was a dice roll, and I rolled a 20-sided die, and then I went to my D20 list that I have in my reading journal, and I got a 20, and that was Peace and Turmoil, which is the first book in the Dark Shores series by Elliot Brooks, and I loved this book. It was so interesting. I loved being able to just savor everything. The characters were really interesting, and again, we've got politics and betrayal and intrigue and so much more in this book. I will talk about it a little bit more in my April wrap-up, which is coming in the next week or two. So stay tuned for that. I did complete my Tomes and Treasures TBR. Now for the Magical Readathon, Orilium. This one I did double major for Ariel, and for Karasu, he ended up taking 3 classes because he is super extra. But she came out with a new class this year and could not pass it up. It is so hard to choose which class you want to take, what direction you want to go, because there are so many good ones. Such a great readathon. And I will leave the links to all of these readathons and the hosts down below in case you want to check them out. All right, Ariel wanted to be a Feywild cartographer as well as a master of elements, and she is part of the Order of the Crescent. And for these, she had to do alchemy, and the prompt was transmutation circles, circle on the cover. And originally, I was going to read The Girl on the Moon by Mark Lawrence on this one. It's the 3rd book in the Book of the Ice series, but I could not find the audiobook. And on my TBR Opoly game, it was on there for audiobook, but I couldn't find the audiobook. I thought I had it, but I didn't. I had the second one. So I had to change that prompt. And since I changed it on my TBR Opoly, I decided to go ahead and swap this book out for something else because it is a fairly long book, especially it doesn't read super quick. So it's not like a rom-com where you could just kind of fly through it and get it all. This one, you got to pay attention to what's going on to really get what's happening in the book. And so I knew it was going to take me way too long to finish that one. So I did swap it for The Princess Trap, which by Talia Hibbert, which is what I read for the Autism Acceptance Readathon. Next up was Animal Studies, and it was Pebble Ducks, read a book with a yellow title. And I read Last Call by John Robinson, and this one was surprisingly good. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know anything about it. I knew it was a Christian fiction book, and that was about it. So this book starts out, and we are in Vietnam. I was like, oh, okay. The last book I really read about Vietnam was probably The Heart of Darkness, which is the movie Apocalypse Now. I had to read that for school and watch the movie. And that was a little much for me, especially at the time. That was before I'd gotten into like Malazan and Joe Abercrombie and some of that. I probably enjoyed the book a lot more now than I did 10, 12, 15 years ago, whenever that was I read that. So I was a little nervous starting out with being in Vietnam. But that was just the first couple of chapters. So then we fast forward to like 40 years later, and the two of the characters were in the same regiment in Vietnam, and they still work together. And so they're together all the time. Their families live near each other, and they're best friends, which is so beautiful. And they are at church together, and they're worshiping, and all of a sudden everyone in the church gets like super quiet. And then kind of like whisperings and little chitter chatter starts going, and it comes to find out everyone heard this week. Just those two words, this week. So what they figured was that the rapture was coming that week, and so they didn't know when that week. It could have been, in an hour, could have been in 2 days, could have been in 7 days, who knows. So these two gentlemen decide that they're going to take this week and they're going to find all the people from their old regiment and make sure that they are right with God. And so the story is them finding all the people that were from that regiment. And it's just a beautiful story of friendship. And there's a couple moments in that book that got me choked up a little bit. And I wouldn't necessarily give it a 5-star. It was definitely a solid 4-star book. It was interesting. It was entertaining, but just the friendship aspect of it and how much all of these people cared for each other, no matter what, was just beautiful. Beautiful story. Next up was Astronomy, and that was Constellation 3, Read a Zodiac Recommendation. So I am a Sagittarius, so I watched a lot of videos of people recommending books for Sagittariuses. And most of them I'd either read already, don't own, or have access to. I was like, oh my gosh, this is getting crazy. I think by like the 7th video, I'm like, there's got to be a book somewhere. I finally found one, and that was The Art of Non-Conformity by Chris Gubo. And I did read that one. I did find it interesting, and I did learn a couple things from it. Next up, Conjuration, Blinding Prism, and had to do a color wheel, and I spun and I got aqua. Yeah, it was more of a tealish color, I would say, but it matched just right with When the Spell Blows by Renee George, again, the 3rd book in the Grimoires of Middle-Aged Witch, and I highly recommend this series. It is so entertaining and just has you laughing out loud. And again, Linda, the snarky gnome, gotta love her. Elemental Studies, Call Lightning, A Source of Light on the cover. And this one I read The Trouble with Peace, Age of Madness, 2nd book, and by Joe Abercrombie, and of course there's fire across the cover of the book that I read. Next up, Inscription. It is a practical class on typography, and you had to write down 3 different books, and then you shuffle them around and you pick one of them. And I got Shade's First Rule by AFK, and this is the 1st book in the Divine Apostasy series, and again, loved it. Can't wait to get to the 2nd book. And this one was a book that I had borrowed from Prime Reading, and I really hope I can find the next book because it was just awesome. Had so much fun. Restoration was next, and that was Regaining Consciousness, a book that can cure a slump. And for that one, I picked Dragonfall, which is the 2nd book in the Kingfall History series by David Estes. Now, of course, I would have picked When the Spell Blows, but I already had that one for a different prompt because they're super quick reads and they're hilarious, so they're fun, kind of gets you back into reading a little bit. Where for Dragonfall, for me, reading a high epic fantasy full of dragons is just right up my alley. And I thoroughly enjoyed the whole book. This one was a lot shorter than the 1st book. The first book was over 800 pages. This one was just over 500, so it was a little bit shorter as well. But I love me a good chunky fantasy. Next up, Shapeshifting. Mimic. Read from an author that has blurbed your last 5-star book. Oh, that one was really hard. I had to go back just over a year to find a book that I gave 5 stars to that also had some kind of blurb that was not from like a newspaper or magazine. Because most of them did not, or they were from YouTubers that weren't authors. So it was hard. But I did finally find one. And I ended up reading The Dangerous Book for Boys by Con and Hal Iggulden. And this one was super interesting. I thought it was really fun. If I had this book around when I was a kid, I would have thoroughly enjoyed it. Some of it I probably would have found quite boring, but other parts I would have loved. And as an adult, I thought all of it was interesting. So there was like how to play card games and how to make a tent, how to make a tree house, how to skip rocks. So much fun. And there's also poetry, like 7 poems you should read, and significant historical events. The 7 wonders of the world, the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So that one is like the Taj Mahal, and it was so interesting, like stocking a first aid kit and some of the first aid information you should know. So like some really useful stuff, but also just fun stuff, how to play stickball and things like that. And it was just a great little encyclopedia style book for boys to learn how to do amazing things. Or girls. I mean, it's called The Dangerous Book for Boys, but it could be for girls too. And then lastly, for Ariel, she had to take Demonology, and that was Pacts and Contracts, a book you didn't pay for, which actually is fairly easy because I read a lot of library books. And this one I read Breach of Peace, which is the prequel novella to the Lawful Times series by Daniel B. Green, which is a fellow booktuber, and I will leave his channel linked below because he is amazing and you absolutely must go to his channel, watch his videos, and subscribe and hit the notification bell for him because he's amazing. And this book was so good, so good. I loved it. And he has actually just started his Kickstarter today that I'm filming, and it's going to be going up through the end of May. And it is his prequel novella and the first book in the Lawful Times series in one book. And you can also add on the beautiful goblin pin and one of his bookmarks as well. And I will leave the link to that down below in case you want to go and support him. For how short this book was, it was like 133 pages. But he packed so much stuff into that 133 pages. It was amazing. So interesting. I cannot wait to read the first book in the series because I am hooked now. The characters were interesting. Of course, there's politics, there's some romance, there's dangerous situations, and just how everything comes together is so intriguing. And I feel like even if you just read that short little novella, it's a great story just on its own. It's not such a big cliffhanger that you're like left with like, what happened? What's gonna happen? It's more like, if it ends here, that's okay because my brain can kind of fill in what I would like to happen. But we know there's another book, so it's like, ooh, now I get to find out what's happening next. It's great on its own, but as part of the series, it's even better. All right, Karasu. This little overachiever decided he wanted to be a godseer. But no, not just a godseer. He also wants to be a scribe. And now, because G's amazing brain came up with the Aldea Excavationist. I actually debated a little bit whether Ariel or Karasu, my different characters, who would want to be the excavationist, because I mean, Ariel is a Feywild cartographer, so I mean, this kind of go well with that too, but it really fit with Karasu's character. So what did we have to read for these callings? Animal Studies, Pebble Ducks again, yellow title of a book. And I read A Hatful of Sky, which is the 32nd book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. And this is the second book in the Tiffany Aching series. And it's more of a middle grade style book, and they are all super cute. Astronomy, Constellation 3, Zodiac Recommendations. I was able to finally find 2. And this one was All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Henry. And if you haven't seen my May TBR yet, I am reading the second book, All of Our Demise, in May. That one does kind of leave you hanging a little bit at the end of the first book, so I'm excited to be able to fit the second book very quickly onto the next month's TBR. Conjuration, Binding Prism, another color wheel, and this time I got dark green, and I read Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett, the 31st book in the Discworld series. Next up, Demonology, Pacts and Contracts, a book you didn't pay for. And this time it was The Seventh Bride by T. Kingfisher, and this one I got through my Prime reading, and this one was an interesting take on a fairy tale style story. So we follow a young girl that finds out she is going to be married to a lord or a higher up gentleman. She thinks she's a little too young for this, but she doesn't want to put hardship on her family, so she agrees, and when she gets to his house, realizes she's going to be the seventh bride. And most of the other brides are still in the house. She's not sure how she feels about this, but she has to go through some tests first before they get married. So if she passes the test, then she can earn her freedom. But she has to pass multiple ones. And if any of them that she fails, then she has to then get married pretty much right away and never return home. As she's traveling to this gentleman's house, she meets a cute little animal that helps her along the way, which is kind of fun. The characters are all interesting. The wives definitely have specific personalities. Some a little more fun than others, some a little more quirky than others. But I love the whole dynamics, the storyline was interesting, and I enjoyed it. Next up, Elemental Studies, Call Lightning, a source of light on the cover. And this is another one I swapped out. So I was originally going to read The Prophet of Edan because it has a stained glass window with lightning, wizard's fire kind of coming out of the fingertips. But it was the last week of April, and this is a 713 page book on my Kindle, so I knew there was no way I was going to finish it. Yeah, I was definitely not going to finish it by the end of the readathon, so I swapped that one out and I read Imperfect Magic by C.N. Rowan instead. Mixed feelings about this book. There's a lot of great reviews about it, and overall it was a really good story, but it took me a little bit to get into it, and I guess I didn't connect with the characters enough to really care what was happening. It was interesting, but not at the same time, if that makes any sense. I'm still kind of trying to figure out my thoughts on this one. So there's a lot of jumping back and forth in time periods throughout the book, which can be a little confusing at times. And the plot was interesting, the reveal and twists were good, but I don't know, for some reason I just didn't connect with the book as much as I thought I was going to. But it was still interesting, and just because I didn't connect with it doesn't mean that you wouldn't absolutely love it. So I would still recommend it, and this one actually worked for my Art Fantasy prompt for reading a book club or buddy read. That was part, and then for hard mode, it has to be one of our fantasies or Reddit's book clubs, and you have to interact. So I was able to interact on their Reddit channel and kind of talk back and forth with about some of the thoughts on the books. Most everybody that on there just loved it, like 4 or 5 stars. I probably would give it maybe 3.5. I haven't got it through Compile quite yet. Imperfect Magic, not bad. Next up, Spells and Incantations. Spell Quick Count, random number generator. The number you get is the length of the title of the book. And I got a 14, and oddly enough, most of the books on my TBR had like 17 letters in the title, which is just weird. So I had like 12, 17, 21, but I finally found one sort of that had 14. So if you just do Vampire Academy, and then there's a colon, and then Crestview High School. If you just do the Vampire Academy part, that was 14 letters, and I took it because that was the only one I could find. I was even going through random books on my shelves to see if I could find something. And that is by Emily Clark, and again, I just talked about that. So next up, Inscription, Practical Typography. Write 3, pick 1. And this time I got Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, the 9th book in the Wheel of Time series. And this book, we do get a lot more of Rand's perspective, and it's not bad. So like the first couple books of Rand's perspective, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, he's kind of annoying, and I don't like being in his head. Like, his character's fine, but I don't want to be in his head. But now it's getting a little better. I enjoy his perspective a little bit more than I did at the beginning of the series. Next up, Lore, Interrupted. Reread The Legend of Dia. All you had to do is reread this one page, which was very nice of G. But then we also had a quest, a lore quest, which was really fun, and don't want you to get any spoilers, but I did do that one, and it was a lot of fun. The lore side quest did not have to be finished by the end of April. You could start it whenever you want, and then it continues up when we get into the August equinox of Magical Readathon. Next up, Psionics and Divination, Clairsentience 2, a prediction bingo. So you had to decide on a book and make a little prediction bingo about what you thought this book was going to be, or what would be in the book. And I read The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sanguman Dana, and I did do a little bingo there, if you can see that. Hopefully it's not super blurry. But I didn't get a bingo, but I did, well, no, I did get a bingo. I got a diagonal bingo right here, because I had a little free space in the middle there. So things that were in there, it was found family, cozy, flowers, and stars, and those were all in the book. So that was actually kind of fun. Lastly, we had Restoration, Regaining Consciousness, a book that will bring you out of a slump. And for that one, I put Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus by Dusty Bowling, and of course it's the first book in the Avon Green series, and I loved this book. Loved it, loved it, loved it. So we get a little bit of found family, because Avon Green is adopted, and she finds new 2 best friends from the Phoenix area after she moves, and it just so heartwarming. So heartwarming. I can't wait to get into the rest of that series, because I want to find out what happens with all of these characters. And that was the end of all of the readathons that I took part in April. Can't remember what month we're in. And I had so much fun in all of them. I did complete the readathons, and I did prioritize the readathons over my TBR Opoly. TBR. So the books on my readathons I prioritized over the books on my TBR Opoly game, which is why I did better on my readathons than my TBR Opoly. But that's for my April wrap up, so you'll have to stay tuned for that one. So thank you so much for joining me for my readathon wrap up, and I hope to see you again in more videos to come. So please like, comment, and subscribe if you want to. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything else from me. And until next time, keep reading. Bye!